days it seems that almost everywhere you turn, there is a serious catastrophe looming just around the corner. You take a look at it, seems pretty scary. The data looks pretty scary. And then suddenly, you see another catastrophe just around the next corner too. There's some pretty heavy stuff that we just have to face in this historic period of time that we are currently living in. And today we're talking, population, death, fertility. The world has just apparently reached 8 billion people. Why does that matter? Well, because we may not have actually hit 8 billion people. But scientists are saying that we may not be able to take much more than another billion or so. But then we're relying on data for that from the world's supposedly most populous nation, which is notorious for providing false data and is undergoing its own serious catastrophe right now. And I'm talking about China, but I'm not talking about the protests and the COVID lockdown. That's included, but there's a much bigger picture going on with China's demographics and the population shrinking big time there. But there's another issue. You can't talk about population without looking at fertility and death rates. I mean, that's how we measure population, isn't it? Births and deaths. Guys, and I mean you guys, men, we really have a problem. There is a serious problem. It affects us ladies too, of course. In the UN, they're so focused on the human rights of women as being reproductive rights. I'll get into that a bit later on. But, what about men's human rights? If we're going to call reproductive rights human rights, what about men's rights? We have a serious catastrophe with sperm counts dropping so low that human beings have basically fit the criteria to be listed as an endangered species. Fertility catastrophe? Yeah, I think so. Let's get into some data on this. It may sound a little bit alarming, but I'm just getting started. Stick with me. I think we need to talk about some big picture stuff sometimes. We are getting into, let's see where we land. You are watching the Today with Kay show, and I'm Kay Rubacek. Gold, 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 gold. Have you heard that before? If you haven't, you haven't been paying attention. We are heading into a recession. It is inevitable. It is a really serious financial crisis. Many people have known this is coming for a long time. The financial analysts who are finally actually talking about it are saying it's going to be a lot worse than they expected. They knew it was coming. Come on. But are you prepared? If you are not, it's not too late. If you want to use gold as a way to secure your assets, you need to talk to someone you can trust, someone who knows the financial industry. Don't talk to a podcaster like me. I know communism and socialism, and I know the economics of that, but I don't know how to invest in gold. You got to talk to an expert. I trust Ira at ourgoldguy.com. Do whatever you can to protect yourself for the upcoming financial crisis. You've got an idea of what's coming. No one knows exactly how bad it's going to be, but now is the time to prepare. Go to ourgoldguy.com, talk to Ira, and mention my name, Kay. Okay, so look at this chart. This purple line is showing that the world population has already peaked. It's peaked. It's done. We peaked in the 1950s. Done. That's it for peaking. Since then, it's coming down. So this chart is a little bit deceptive because you look at it and it just looks like, wow, massive. We have a massive population. If you look at the stats in the opposite direction, you get this. So this table shows the population growth instead of the number of people on the earth. It shows the actual population growth, and we have come down really, 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 really low. it looks kind of extreme because we've got, you know, a very small, these are all fractions of a percent, but we're all the way down under 1%. So in terms of like seriously worrying about population growth, that's not turning around. Like, we are so low on population growth that it's kind of crazy to be worried about population growth. I mean, seriously, it's crazy. This is a CBS news article. The reason I bring this up is because it talks about the UN. Now, how do we know when that 8 billionth baby was born? The UN says we don't. And so, you know, the news says we hit 8 billion people, but actually we don't know. The UN says themselves, we do not pretend that that's the actual date. We think that the uncertainty is at least plus or minus 1 year. So when you hear that 8 billion number, we may not have hit it. That's the truth of it. So just keep that in mind. If the stats are saying that China is the most populous nation, well, I question that. It's already predicted that India is going to surpass China as the most populous nation, and that's in 2023. I would argue that it's already there. China's population has been declining for a while. It's already impacting China in a huge way. So the fertility rate has dropped down, and the number of people having children has dropped down, even though the government has tried to, or the regime has tried to increase the population by encouraging people to have more children. It's not really working. Now, the denial of the Chinese government, I don't really like to call it a government because I just don't see it as a legitimate regime when you have a one-party monopoly. It is a regime. I don't see it as a legitimate government. So the regime is denying that the population has been declining, but the Chinese Communist Party always denies any data that is critical of its regime. We always think that China has plenty of people. That's what we always have in mind, is that China's got the most people, and those people are, you know, we kind of have this concept, well, they can work hard, they can take over our labor because, you know, China just has so many people, and that I hear so many lies from sort of repeated falsehoods from people repeating from the Chinese Communist Party, saying that, well, you know, there's so many people in China that if the regime wasn't in power, it'd be in chaos. I mean, that's just a false narrative run by the Chinese Communist Party. China has existed for more than 5,000 years. The Chinese Communist Party's only been around for, 100 years. So, and the death count under the Chinese Communist Party is horrific, and the human rights is horrific. So the human rights record is horrific. So there's a lot to say about no matter how many people are in China, definitely those people could exist under a better regime or an actual government. So when you think about how many people are in China and that they're constantly working in those factories, right? How often do you see those images of Chinese people working in a factory, working hard to make your iPhone or clothes or something else? They don't have enough people. We always think they have enough people, but they don't. We've always thought that China has enough people. The Chinese regime has always thought they have enough people. They have relied on having enough people. But there is a problem. So China has a shrinking workforce, not just a shrinking population, but an actual shrinking workforce. And apparently that has been topping out since 2011. So this is not a new problem. It's just that we haven't been talking about it so much. But now, when you take a look at this, with China's population, this is an article from last year where a senior scientist in the University of Wisconsin, so he is estimating that China's 2020 population was actually 1.28 billion rather than 1.41 billion. and that fertility rates were actually lower than reported. Now, whenever I see numbers coming out from the Chinese Communist Party, I question them. Well, actually, I don't trust them because they constantly lie about their data, and they never offer any or provide any true transparency to accurately assess the data. So often experts will say, okay, any data coming out from the Chinese regime, if it's a calculation of a bad number, times it by 10. So I think this guy, I wouldn't be surprised if the actual population in China was like, as this scientist is saying, Chinese scientist is saying, 1.28 billion. So that would put China under India. So India being 1.4, that puts China at 1.2, well below India and still well above USA, but well below what we thought. That also puts us well below the 8 billion on the Earth human population count. And like I said earlier, this is not a new problem. China's population has been shrinking since, well, for quite some time. This scientist is saying since 2018. Now, here's a demographic expert and geopolitical expert on China's demographic catastrophe. And this is why I call it a catastrophe, because this is serious stuff.
Which countries at the moment have got the worst demographics? Which countries which countries should be very concerned about the ratio of young to old?
The worst in the world is China. They've been in the process of updating their data over the course of the last couple of years, and they're now starting to publicly admit that they overcounted by 100 million people. All of those people would have been born since one child, so age 40 and under, the young worker demographic, the childbearing demographic, and 2/3 of them are probably women. So best guess is that China only has 1.3 billion people now. The population probably peaked more than 10 years ago, and by 2030, there will be more retirees than workers. And by 2050, the entire population of China will have dropped below 650 million.
That's wild.
It's beyond terminal. Yeah, so the Chinese system collapses this decade for sure. Assuming nothing else goes wrong. And there's plenty other competitors to put the bullet in China's head.
Dude, that is crazy.
Okay, so it's not just some Chinese scientist in Wisconsin who's saying that China's population could be down to 1.2 billion people. Peter Zayan is an expert in demography and in geopolitics. On his website here, this is his comparison of China's demographics. Now, this is female on the left, male on the right in millions. This is 2015, and then you compare it with what he's predicting for 2040. Now, this doesn't give you a good calculation of like total number of people, but it shows you the aging population. You see really go back here and you can see, okay, the young people are shrinking. And well, actually all ages are shrinking. So where does that leave the rest of the world? Now, there's another catastrophe that you've likely heard of, this concept of died suddenly. You may have seen Stu Peters recently put out his documentary of that name. And in the documentary, it starts out by, the protagonist typing in the word died suddenly into search engines. And well, it's something that I've been noticing well before seeing that documentary, is the number of deaths that are visible online. And I've never seen so many people die right like in front of me as I have in these past few years. And I'm talking about seeing people die in a video, but these are real deaths, right? These you've likely seen someone has died. Videos of people dying on the street, falling down dead, sitting in their chairs, experiencing a seizure or something like that. Now, we're being told through a lot of media, this is a Daily Mail news example, that this is a new normal, and that young people under 40 years old need to get their hearts checked, because there's this concept of dying suddenly. And just seeing that happen everywhere has just been absolutely shocking. How does that affect a society? I mean, the numbers, you may have heard that earlier this year, an Indiana life insurance CEO said that deaths are up 40% among young people, 18 to 64. So not just young, it's still middle age as well there, but a 40% increase in deaths. Now that is catastrophic. Those numbers are actually it's a 40% increase over pre-pandemic. So it's not just right now, during COVID during COVID and just after. It's actually based on numbers pre-pandemic. So, and he says here, just to give you an idea of how bad it is, a 3 sigma or a 1 in 200 year catastrophe would be a 10% increase over deaths pre-pandemic. So 40% is just unheard of. Now, this isn't just one guy saying this. There's been verifications done by a number of experts. But we're also seeing numbers like this in Canada. So last year, Canada euthanized 10,000 people. And this is the MAID, M-A-I-D, medical assisted death. MAID, medical assistance in dying, also called physician assisted death. And there's been some brands even really kind of glorifying that form of suicide. It is a form of suicide. It is something that I think is, in Canada, they're trying to put a euphemism on it, calling it death or assisted dying, but it is suicide. And this is a slippery slope once we start to call things by different names and don't call them what they actually are. So there's a lot of concerns by doctors in Canada and all around the world, because this could happen elsewhere, and people may start to seek or demand for this to be made available in their country. And it is a really slippery slope if people start to ask for that, and then the system starts to allow this type of death to occur. And so if people are seeing all this population data saying, well, we've hit 8 billion people, we've got far too many people, we've got a climate catastrophe, we need to reduce the population. Then when they hear about things like medical assisted death, well, suicide, that seems more attractive to them. So these kind of catastrophic, fear-inducing narratives about population that, when we look at the data, it may not be that accurate. It's actually inspiring negatively this culture of more death. Okay, yeah, we're getting a little dark here. I promise we'll end with some hope, but yeah, this is kind of serious stuff, right? There's been studies done on soldiers who've had to, they have to kill in war and in certain circumstances. It's not something that they are naturally just born to do. It's hard for them to take a human life, and doing that causes, very often causes trauma. Now, to ask doctors and nurses to do that is, I think it's going to cause a lot of trauma for a lot of people, for them, and then that affects their family too. We're going to see PTSD happening for those medical practitioners. When you witness a death, it really affects you. I know my own experiences with seeing loved ones pass away. It's really, it stays with you. If you've been through it, you know what I'm talking about. It really it's just something I just don't think you can ever forget. And that's not participating in that person's dying. It's kind of being there to care and support them. That feeling of being with them is already, and just seeing it happen and losing them that way is so traumatic. Yet for doctors and nurses to actually have to participate in that process, I think is going to be hugely damaging for the medical profession and the people in it. And the amount of stress that's going to add to their lives is just huge. And there's been studies done that when you're exposed to a life-threatening trauma, you risk developing PTSD. And when you see someone else pass away, suddenly, you have that risk as well of suffering PTSD. So while we're being told that our population is going crazy out of control with too many people, at the same time, we are witnessing deaths in society that we're not used to. I can't count the number of videos that I've seen this year where people have died suddenly. And I'm watching a video on, say, even Instagram now. I've seen a lot on Twitter, but Instagram, I've started seeing them there. And it says, look, this guy just died. And then you're watching it. Like, I'm watching it on social media. There is someone dying right in front of me. Think that is affecting our society. I feel uncomfortable. I feel bad for the person. I feel moved. We're all kind of experiencing some kind of trauma around the population crisis in the world. And, you may be feeling some of these things here, 12 common reactions to trauma, replaying the memory. Maybe you've seen something, you've witnessed something, maybe you've watched a video on social media and it stays with you. It could be quite upsetting. You might dream about it. You might have flashbacks to it. Certainly if you've seen a loved one pass away in front of you, you have those memories there with you. Then there's the emotional reactions of feeling fear and anxiety. Sometimes it brings up anger because, it's normal when you lose someone. Sadness, guilt, feeling numb, all of these things that you may be feeling for different reasons could be related to this life and death crisis going on around us with the population kind of catastrophe going on. Then, we tend to put ourselves on guard, which we're not trusting people as much. We start to sort of shelter ourselves. And I think just witnessing what we've seen with even seeing the riots in 2020, people being beaten on the streets. I remember seeing that in those videos and thinking, wow, I can't believe I just saw that woman get beaten with a stick right in front of me. And I can still remember that now. And it makes you, put up a guard, right? And then start to think differently about things. And our society is changing based on this. There's a lot of symptoms there. But I like how this article ends, is that, at the worst of times in our lives, we need the best from one another. I think, to me, that's the best reminder, because, even if we're not experiencing, say, a climate catastrophe or a overpopulation catastrophe, we are seeing people really being hurt and harmed and a very large amount of death happening due to so many different reasons, but things that, we've just never seen before. And I think it's really difficult, but I think we also need to talk about it. If you cannot talk about it, and if you cannot process it in your head, it weighs on you so much. But when you do talk about it, you can kind of, I find it helps to relieve some of that anxiety and some of that stress, and realize that, others are experiencing the same thing. And that can give you a lot more courage and positivity to actually get through and say, okay, I'm not the only one. It's not just me having these feelings or feeling anxious and stressed because of all of these catastrophes and scary things happening around me. That's why I like this quote. At the worst times in our lives, we need the best for one another. That's when we got to be strong for each other. When I'm weak, I've got my husband to be strong for me, and vice versa. And I think we need that. Now, speaking of men and husbands and relationships, there's still the other part of population catastrophe that I really wanted to talk about here, because the UN is very concerned about the global population. As we know, they very much want to control the global population numbers. But when you look at their texts, they are very, very much concerned about women's reproductive rights as a human right. They're putting this as a higher priority than sudden deaths of young people or drop of sperm count of men on a global scale. We're really mixing the waters there, and things are getting politicized here. So this is a whole nother topic that I'm going to get into on another episode with women's rights and all of that. But what the UN is totally missing here, and I think that's just part of their political agenda, is the sperm count drop. Now, in terms of population, this is just absolutely massive. This book came out by Dr. Shanna Swan. Here are some facts from their studies. So yes, worldwide fertility has dropped more than 50% over the past 50 years. So we know that. Now, a man today has only half the number of sperm his grandfather had. Okay, maybe it doesn't seem so bad, but it does if you want to have kids. And if we want the population to actually continue, and if we don't want the human species to die out, and if we don't want all babies to be born in a laboratory, you need sperm. That's how it works. Women are definitely less fertile than they were before, but look at this. Homo sapiens already fit the US Fish and Wildlife Services standard to be considered an endangered species. The endangered species on the US Fish and Wildlife Service, they got amphibians, they got some worms, they got some arachnids, and they do have some mammals. We're not on there. I'm kind of glad that we're not on there. I kind of don't want the human race to be on there, but looking at their criteria, these demographic experts say that we fit the bill. That sounds kind of catastrophic. And what's causing it? A lot of it's to do with chemicals in the foods that we're eating, guys, and also lifestyle. So being more healthy in eating and occupation, drugs, alcohol, that sort of stuff, but also emotional stress, depression. That's really plays a big factor on sperm counts in guys. So, ladies, you got to help your man to be less stressed and more fertile. We have a role to play too. It's getting to the point where people are more likely to need medical assistance to have a baby than to not. That's just where we're at. Yeah, the containers you use, the food you eat, definitely a lot of plastics, eating out, filtered water, not drinking in the plastics. But guys who ate less processed meat and more fish have a higher quality sperm count, have a higher quality sperm, but also higher count of sperm as well. Processed meat is not great. You don't want to eat too much of that, guys. And if you are, try and cut back on it. Weightlifting has supposedly improves high sperm counts. It increases testosterone, improves insulin sensitivity, and avoiding soy-based food products. I don't know. We're being told to be eating less meat and eating more fake meat, but a lot of that's soy-based. Not good for men. Now, this isn't going to change and solve any population major fertility crises, but hey, this may help. If you're not aware, boxers versus briefs, they're saying that cotton boxers, more comfortable, more cool, more loose, is better for sperm count for guys out there. So, ladies, check your guys' undies, see what they're wearing. Maybe you can help them out. Maybe they just want to stick to the tight pants. I don't know. Up to you all. I have no opinion on what you wear, but these are health studies done on sperm counts, and they're saying that loose, cool cotton undies can help you guys out. We need to keep the human race going, and we need the guys to do it. Men's fertility rates being so low that it's basically catastrophic. That's the measure of global health we're at right now. I think it's a very limited point of view if we only look at the UN's global health standards and population standards being kind of defined by the human rights of women's reproductive rights, and have that kind of being the most important thing in the social agenda. If we're forgetting a really, really important measure of global health, which is men's fertility. Guys, if you don't have the testosterone, if you don't have a high sperm count, you can't have kids. And then women can't have kids without you, or we're going to be going to lab babies. And maybe that's what the UN would like. Maybe that's what globalist communists would like. But I just think we don't have to worry about what they like. I think it all comes back to, what are you going to do with your body? What are you going to do with your family? Wherever you are on this beautiful planet, whatever number out of the billions of people on the earth you happen to be, we don't know what that number is. The UN doesn't even know, and certainly the Chinese Communist Party doesn't know either. So what really matters is that you value yourself, and I really encourage you to strengthen your faith, strengthen your family, and reach out when you need help. Ask someone. Call that number. Send that message. Do it. These are tough times, and be there for someone else when they need you. We got to be here for each other. Thank you for sticking out this episode with me. I really appreciate it. It was a tough one. And if we can get through this stuff, we can get through anything. You've been watching the Today with Kay show. I'm Kay Rubacek, and I'll see you again soon.